cover of the book. Ottawa native and People magazine senior crime writer Christine Pelisek first began her hunt for the Grim Sleeper over 10 years ago, and now her new book chronicles how she helped catch a serial killer. So great to have her joining us this morning. I am fascinated. I'm like, we need an hour. But you've been able to do this book. You're from here.
Yes, I am.
And then actually studied at Carleton University.
Yeah, I lived in Beacon Hill.
Amazing. What led you to LA, at least to be in the vicinity, working in LA, to launch into this
Well,
career?
I was working at a weekly newspaper called the LA Weekly, and it was an alternative paper, and I started there. And I started covering crime. And one day, I was always going to the coroner's office and, looking for stories. Usually go on a Monday and there's plenty of murders over the weekend. So I'd go there looking for stories. And one time when I went, he told me that the coroner's office was looking into a serial killer, looking to start a serial killer unit because there was all these body dumps, which were female women that were found in alleys and dumpsters around the Los Angeles area. And so they thought that some of the cases might be linked. And so they found 38 cases. And so I asked him, I'm like, let me see this list of 38 women. And he didn't want to show me the list. So I basically pestered him for like 3 or 4 months. And he was like, no, we'll do it. We'll look into it. And he talked to the law enforcement, and law enforcement didn't want the coroner involved in any way. And so he finally gave me this list of 38 women, and it was all a mix of women, every race possible. So I ended up looking at every single case. And when I got to number 37 on the list, it was a 15-year-old girl named Princess Berthomeo, and she was found murdered in an alley in Inglewood, which is just next to Los Angeles. And I found out about her, and I talked to this Inglewood detective that was handling her case, and he told me actually that case was linked to a case in 2003, because Princess was 2002. She was linked to 2003 case, and then those 2 cases were linked to a series of murders that were occurring in South Los Angeles back in the 80s, and the killer was still out there.
Okay, usually we think of like this, we're looking at television series and you see this team of people that are in this office that they've got, all of every case pointed out. I mean, here you are, an individual kind of working this on your own. How did it develop to be able to do these links and then to really bring this story to the forefront?
Well, at first when I found out about it, it wasn't public, right? Mm-hmm. So no one knew about it. Back in the 80s when there was this series of murders, back in the 80s in South Los Angeles, it was so brutal back then, there were 6 active serial killers operating at the same time in South Los Angeles. So they didn't know what was going on, They thought it was one guy, and then they thought it was maybe more. And then later they just kind of forgot about it. And so they did find out about it with the DNA connection, but they weren't telling anyone, so they didn't tell the public. So the public didn't know about it. So my point was to write stories to let the public know, because the families, I told some of the families that their daughters were victims of a serial killer because the police didn't tell them.
The story is unbelievable, and it really comes down to an individual who the community never would have anticipated would be one to fall into the line of a serial killer.
Yeah.
The man who ends up, a father, a grandfather.
That's right.
A man out in the community. And how did the name The Grim Sleeper really come to be?
I actually coined it. My editor and I, we wanted to do a big splashy story. And so she was like, we have to name him. And so she had all these names like Ripper Van Winkle and, all these names. I'm like, no. And I thought Grim's Reaper. And then I was like Grim Sleeper because he took a break between the killings. Mm-hmm. His last known victim at one point was 1988. And then the last one after that was 2002. So there was that 13-and-a-half-year gap. And so we ended up calling him the Grim Sleeper. And it didn't actually really take. No other paper really picked it up until Chief Bratton, LAPD Chief Bratton, called him that. And then everyone else started calling him that after that.
It was through DNA? It was through...
He was caught through familial DNA testing.
Okay, explain that for us because it's different.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened was they found his DNA. The killer's DNA was found on all the women's bodies, but the killer was not in a felon databank. So basically what it meant was that he had never been charged with a crime and he had never gone to prison. Because if he had gone to prison, he would have been swabbed. So they knew all the cases were linked, but they didn't have a face. So this familial DNA testing is, there's a chance that 40%, if you're a felon, there's a 40% chance that you're gonna have a male relative who's going to be a felon, like a brother, a cousin, an uncle. And so what they did is in 2008, they did this test in California, and it came back nothing. And so they did it again in 2010, and it hit on Lonnie Franklin Jr.'s son, who was 28 years old at the time. He had been charged with a weapons charge in 2009 and had to get DNA swabbed. And they knew he wasn't the killer because he was only 20, so he was
have
like
been
2
too
years
young,
old or
yeah.
whatever at the time, yeah.
And that's how they were able to do it.
Yeah, and they followed the father around and
how they did
grab
that
him.
is even interesting, in a restaurant as busboys. This is the book, The Grim Sleeper, and you're going to be on hand to do some signings. You've done a couple, but you have another one coming up.
Yeah, Indigo Chapters in
okay.
Bar Haven on Saturday from 12 to 4.
Okay, so interesting, and to know that you had written everything down as you were doing this, so the process of getting this book together really came together. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Fascinating story.